Hello everybody and welcome to No BS Small Business Marketing. I am your host, Jarrod Cash. It is good to be back with you today. It's been a while since our last episode, more than 2 months since episode 3. I apologize to everybody. I was in a car accident, I had a bit of an injury, took a while to get things back on schedule after that. But we are here, we are back. You're going to get regular episodes moving forward from this point. So thank you so much for tuning in. If this is the first time you're listening, it is pretty important that you go back to, at the minimum, episode number 1. It lays a foundation for everything that we've talked about up to this point and what we'll talk about from this point forward. Episodes 2 and 3, also very beneficial. Episode 1, critical. So with that said, let's jump right into episode number 4, which I've decided to call The Secret of the 4 M's. Now, this is a vital recipe moving forward. You must match, when it comes to your advertising and your marketing, you must match your message, your market, and your media. These 3 components, these 4 M's, are a super vital key to having any success with any type of advertising that you're putting out. So let's jump right into what these specific areas are, starting with the market. Now, some people like to think that no matter what their business is, everybody is their customer, and that is not the case. Individuals are your customers. Everyone doesn't buy from you. The masses will not be coming to your individual business. And you have to remember, when you're putting out a sales message, you're speaking to the individual person. Whatever media that you're using, it's the individual that's hearing it. So you must define who your target customers or clients are, and you've got to be as specific as possible. Now, there's 3 main ways that you can use to do that. Now, excuse me for a second. We are out in the desert. Even though it is October right now, it's still in the high 90s out here in Vegas. So I'm going to have to pause for a drink from time to time. Okay, the 3 ways that we can define a market is going to be geographic, through the use of demographics, or through association. So let's dive into these a little bit more. For the geographics, we're going to use an example. Let's say you have an upscale suburban restaurant. Okay, so like we just said, if you think everyone in town, plus all the tourists coming in, are going to be your customers, that is a very generic, and that is a terrible way to market, and it's not going to work. You're going to wind up wasting a lot of money, especially if you're trying to do direct response. And the key to being successful in your marketing, as we've talked about in prior episodes, is not wasting your money. So we can start to dial things in a little bit more specifically by going after what is fairly obvious would be zip codes. Okay, but that's not good enough. We need to dial it in a little bit more, especially at the beginning. Now, after you've been marketing in a certain geographic area for a while, you might just expand out eventually to only the zip code, because one thing you want to do when you start advertising in your market is to dominate it as much as possible. However, zip codes here in the beginning, too generic for this example. More specific would be a 4-mile radius around the restaurant. But since we're talking about an upscale restaurant in this instance, something that would be even better would be a list of all the homeowners within the 4 miles of the restaurant, because they're much more likely to have some expendable cash. Okay, so there's an example of using geographic metrics. Now the next one is demographics, and that's going to be your behavioral, having a hard time with that word today, behavioral, statistical, or psychological commonalities within groups. All right, an example of that is going to be, say, men over the age of 30. Now that's a decent group, but it's still pretty huge, and we can really dial that in by, say, going in and looking for men over 30 earning $100,000 or more per year, unmarried, with no children. Now, depending on what your service or your sales item is, that could be a very valuable market of people. And finally, that brings us to association. Now, what that means in this instance is members of a particular group. So you can target market members of a group. Say if you're a local business or even a national business, you can employ this strategy. Some local examples would be members of your Chamber of Commerce, members of the Toastmasters, various civic groups, church groups, meetup groups, etc. On a national level, a couple of examples that easily come to mind would be the NRA or the AARP. And what you can also do with these three choices here is mix them up. Say you're using demographics. You're a local business, so you want men over 30 earning $100,000 per year, unmarried, with no children, living in a very specific zip code, who are homeowners. You can really use this to dial information in. Then you could even add a group in there who have all of the above, plus they're members of the NRA or whatever large group that is. So that really narrows your target down even further if you want to. The important thing is that you get this as defined as possible before you start crafting anything else. The next step, excuse me, the next step is the message. Now you'll notice I just used the word crafted. That's very, very important that you have a crafted sales pitch in any type of advertising that you're doing. You can take this sales pitch, whatever length it is, and modify it for whatever specific media that you're using. As we've discussed in episodes number 1, the name of your company, however many years you've been in business, whatever cute slogan you may or may not have, these are not reasons for people to do business with you. So these are not a sales pitch, and they should not be the focus of your advertising. Now, if you have a hard time crafting a sales pitch or figuring out how you're going to stick it in maybe a smaller ad, then at the bare minimum you need to have a USP. Now that stands for a unique selling proposition. Now this is something that we're going to discuss a bit in further episodes, but for now just know that a USP answers the question in your customer's mind of why they should do business with you versus anybody or anybody else that they can do business with. So now moving on from message, the third and final M in this match, excuse me, it's dry out here in the desert, is the media. Now the media is whatever you're using to get your message out. And here in 2018 and beyond, the choices continue to grow day after day. But there's a few things, a few keys that you really need to remember when selecting a media. And number one key is going to make sure that your targets are actually using it. Okay? Now that might sound obvious, but it's not as simple as you think. Facebook is a popular advertising tool. But, much to some people's surprise, everyone is not on Facebook. Not everybody listens to the radio. Not everybody reads a particular website. You have different combinations for every customer target and business combination. But you've got to make certain that whatever targets that you're deciding to use are actually using the media that you're going to put it out on. Otherwise, no matter how good your message is, it's ultimately going to flop. And one thing that you also want to remember is to use as many different kinds of media as possible. You never want to rely on just one or two or three strategies or forms of getting your message out. In some of my seminars, I used to talk about something called like a wagon wheel, and I'll use that example here right now. Picture the different forms of media and marketing tools that you're using to get your message out, like an old-time wagon wheel that they used to have on, say, a covered wagon, right? So you've got an outer wheel, and then you've got an inner wheel with spokes going outside, right? And the more spokes that you have on a wheel like that, the stronger that wheel is. Think of your different forms of media that you're using as spokes on a wheel. You don't want to have just one or two, because that wheel's going to be weak and it's going to fall apart. You want to have as many as possible. And when selecting as many as possible, it's very, very important that you remember to test. As we've talked about in earlier episodes, the golden rule of direct response marketing is test, test, test. We test small before we roll out big. That way we don't waste money. So, take these three M's, we match them, and then you've got to remember the mental shift that we discussed about in the last episode, which was you need to stop thinking of yourself as a doer of whatever particular business or thing that it is that you do, and think of yourself as a marketer of that service or that item or that business. And of course, you need to use direct response methods and make sure to match the message, the market, and the media. Now that's the end of today's episode, folks. You're going to get episode number 5 rolling out shortly after this one. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can download the podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes and more at jarrodcash.com. If you'd like to watch the videos instead, you can go to youtube.com/JarrodCash. That's JARROD. Thanks again for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you on episode number 5. Peace.